I'm grateful to be here. Thank you to Larry and for the session for the invitation, working it out. Very comfortable pulpit, but somehow oddly unfamiliar right now. Mom, there's nothing to do. Have you gone over to Tommy's house? Mommy, I'm bored. Have you read the library books we picked out? But Tommy's not home, and I've read 2 of the books, but the others are too hard for me. Surprised and a little exasperated, Dick and Jane's mother pulled out the list of 30 things to do over the summer they'd worked on and agreed on together. All these activities were planned to keep the children occupied, stimulated in a positive way and out of harm's way. She read through it aloud, and each item was greeted with a, "Oh," or "Not now, Mom." School only let out last week. It would be a long 2.5 months. This exchange, or rather the children's responses, provides a way for us to look at today's reading from Paul's letter to the church at Rome and the first part of the gospel passage. Even though the family had planned these activities together, both mother and children are effectively saying, "I don't understand my own actions, for I do not do what I want, enjoy summer vacation, but I do the very thing I hate, do nothing, be bored, and complain." Jesus describes the people in the crowd as not happy, whether dancing or mourning, playing the flute or wailing. In short, very discontented, like Dick and Jane, who are not happy doing things, but aren't happy being idle either. To live coherent and undivided lives is hard work, Peter Marty says. We decide on one kind of behavior only to act in another way. Sometimes we wrestle with how to live on the outside in a way that doesn't corrupt the wholeness we've come to prize and cultivate on the inside. Other times we seek to do good only to succumb to something wrong deep within us. The tongue-tying words of the Apostle Paul describe this second tendency. I can will what is right, but I cannot do it. For I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I do. Now, if I do what I do not want, it's no longer I that do it, but sin that dwells in me. The tug of war between wearing a halo on our head and rottenness on our sleeve is hardly an adolescent phenomenon. Many of us look throughout the course of life for that integrative power that will help our mind, heart, soul, and body cohere. Some of you, in fact, looking at the age, I think all of us, may remember the comedian Flip Wilson. One of the characters he created was Geraldine Jones, a sassy, liberated Southern woman. When asked about her outrageous clothing and why she would buy it, her response always was, "The devil made me do it." Doesn't that sound like Paul? Like us? Sin has power over us. And we were warned way back in Genesis 4 when God said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is lurking at your door. Its desire is for you, but you must master it." There's a constant struggle within us between following the Creator's law and a law rooted in our humanity. This Romans passage, to me, is complicated, repetitive. I just had struggle with it. But he says things a little more clearly in Galatians 5, where he says, what the flesh desires is opposed to the Spirit, and what the Spirit desires is opposed to the flesh. For these are opposed to each other, to prevent you from doing what you want. Lest we get too comfortable, remember Reinhold Niebuhr said it's the job of the preacher to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. Sin is not just failing to follow the Ten Commandments. It's anything that separates us from God or neighbor. Sin is anything that fails to show and live out care for other people, for ourselves, or for God's creation. Shanthia Moore, in her review of Standing Naked Before God, said, here are some modern liberal sins: reliance on fossil fuels, addiction to social media, lack of self-care. People confess to being controlling, introverted, short-tempered, and pessimistic. Things that separate us from God, from each other, and from ourselves. Now, many of Paul's letters were addressed to what would have been a predominantly Greek community. Remember, know thyself was one of the 3 sayings inscribed on the temple of Apollo at Delphi. Paul acknowledges the conflict is within me, focusing on himself and his relationship to God, suggesting this passage may have been influenced by the Greek world, even though he's writing to the Roman world. Now, when Paul says, I do not do what I want, and I do what I do not want to do, is he saying he lacks self-understanding as a matter of fact? Or is it out of frustration from not being able to exercise self-control? His and our conflicts are internal ones, not ones with the outside world. Outside world external conflict, on the other hand, the one you and I face when we leave these walls, was one that Abraham took on willingly. Living in the promised land, but as a newcomer and a foreigner, could have been made a lot easier by seeking a wife for Isaac from among the locals. However, he purposely did not assimilate with his surrounding culture when he sent his servant back to his homeland. In this respect, we are like Abraham. Our calling as Christians is to seek God's will even when, not if, even when God's will leads to conflict with the surrounding culture. Consider what else we learn from this tale in Genesis. Members of Abraham's household picked up on his faith, his deep, abiding faith. The servant acknowledges God, recognizes that God may provide a sign. And when God gives him the sign, the servant both recognizes it and follows through on it. The other night, Carol and I were watching the 2003 film, Bruce Almighty. She said, "You can use that in your sermon?" I hadn't planned to. But then there's a scene where Bruce is seeking God's guidance, and he follows a truck of road signs. He sees a flashing road sign, "Caution ahead." Bruce ignores those signs. Abraham's servant does not. Asking for a sign, though, is different from asking God for a specific outcome. Be honest with yourself. Have you asked God for a sign, or have you asked God for this specific outcome? If you asked God for a sign, how did you recognize the sign? Did you recognize it when you received it? Or in hindsight? It seems to me that God gives the servant the sign. God reveals Rebekah to Abraham's servant because the servant possessed faith, the faith of his master, yet also his own faith, a faith in the creating God of the universe. What prompted Rebekah to go with the servant, or even to offer to water his camels, if not God's revelation to her? Like Abram and Sarai, Rebekah left everything she had known, everything, to go into the unknown. God also, like to Abraham and Sarah, revealed that she would be the mother of a great people. And God used Rebekah's family to give her similar words to those her granduncle Abraham had heard. In response to the confirmation Rebekah would be Isaac's wife, the servant first attaches signs of ownership, a nose ring and bracelets, then worships God for leading him in the right way. Worship is always the proper response to answered prayer. Note that both at the beginning and the end of this section, the servant recognizes and acknowledges God's blessings. The faith of this narrative is one in which things occur seemingly as they will, and yet they're credited to God, and rightly so. The faith offered here is for those who are willing to be led and sets such faith precisely where it must be lived, between the old place abandoned and the new place not yet received. That faith in which we are willing to be led is exactly what Jesus refers to in offering his yoke. To put the passage in Matthew in context, Jesus has just finished teaching his disciples, and at the start of chapter 11, he begins teaching and preaching in Galilee. John's disciples join the crowd, and Jesus describes John as the Messiah's herald. I imagine Jesus sees some yawns and eye rolls in the crowd just before voicing his frustration. But to what will I compare this generation? John the Baptist has led a life of austerity, neither drinking wine nor eating bread, and he is thought to have a demon. Jesus has brought new life and wholeness to countless people and has shown the world how to enjoy life. He's called a drunkard and a glutton and is looked down on for the people with whom he associates. Which way is it, people? The crowd could not be satisfied with their alternatives, just like Dick and Jane. The crowd is fickle, restless, not really sure what they want. What do they want? The crowd seems to willfully seek ways to reject or deny God's messengers. They will not say, this one is just right. The people want what they want. They want their will to be done, thank you very much. Such continual dissatisfaction could be relieved by hearkening to Jesus' yoke and taking it on. It's a refreshing, easy, and light one, because Jesus brings joy and peace with it. Do we seek such an encounter with Jesus? What do we want? Jesus compared the people of his day to children who cannot be satisfied with any game or activity, whether festive or somber. They rejected John the Baptist because of his ascetic lifestyle, only to turn around and reject Jesus because he ate and drank with sinners. Their unreasonable actions reflected their lack of faith. In the second part of this passage, we hear Jesus' words against apathy and self-importance. saying the good news is hidden from the wise and the intelligent, yet revealed to infants. Echoes of Jesus saying, only the childlike can come to me. For those who are self-important and consider themselves to be intelligent, well, Ray Stevens said, there are none so blind as he who will not see. The last few verses of Matthew passage, we hear a passage nearly as familiar as the 23rd Psalm. Come to me, come to me, come to me, all of you. If you're weary, if you're heavy laden, I will give you rest. It sounds soothing, comforting, pastoral. I will give you rest is more like relief from boredom. And Jesus is calling those who are oppressed by routine, monotony, overwork, responsibility, and tension. We get lulled into an easy, tranquil state of mind and lose sight of the urgency present in this passage. What do I want? What does God want? Always a tug of war between the two. Free will? God's will. Always a tug of war between the two. Paul's letter to the Roman church seems like a classic game of tug of war between our longing to obey God and our propensity to sin. We're all like Paul, aren't we? Captives and unwilling prisoners to the law of sin and death. Sin has power over me. It's a heavy burden, relieved by recognizing signs God gives us and putting on the yoke of Jesus Christ. Will you choose the law of sin and death, or will you choose the law of life? To God alone be the glory. Amen and amen.